Picture a creature the size of a chicken standing in the palm of your hand, 50 centimeters long, weighing 2 to 3 pounds, eyes bright, alert, watching you. Now imagine it lived 125 million years ago, in a world ruled by multi-ton predators. And imagine that when scientists finally analyzed its bones in February 2026, they realized something profound. This tiny animal is reshaping the ornithischian family tree. Its name is Foskeia pelendonum, and it's forcing paleontologists to rethink assumptions they've held for decades. Here's why that matters. For 150 years, we've understood dinosaur evolution as a story of increasing size. Bigger bodies, stronger jaws, more powerful limbs. The logic was simple: in a world of giants, you either grew large enough to compete or you went extinct. But Foskeia breaks that pattern. It didn't grow larger, it grew smaller. And not just smaller, radically miniaturized, with a skull that isn't just small, it's hyper-derived, like evolution took a shortcut and then doubled back. The fossils were discovered in northern Spain, in a region that's been yielding dinosaur bones for decades. But when Dr. Fidel Torcida Fernandez Balder from the Dinosaur Museum of Salas de los Infantes first examined these remains, he knew immediately they were different. Quote, "From the beginning, we knew these bones were exceptional because of their minute size. It is equally impressive how the study of this animal overturns global ideas on ornithopod dinosaur evolution." The bones represented at least 5 individuals. And when the team analyzed the microstructure of the largest specimen, slicing the femur into sections just 100 microns thick, thinner than a human hair, they found something unexpected. Under polarized light, the growth lines appeared like faint rings in glass, tightly packed, indicating slow, steady deposition. Dense bone tissue, fused growth plates, no cartilaginous zones indicating ongoing growth. This wasn't a baby dinosaur that died young. This was a fully grown adult. Foskeia pelendonum reached sexual maturity at the size of a chicken and stayed that way. So here's the question that's driving paleontologists right now. In a world of giants, where predators could swallow you whole and competitors could crush you underfoot, how did an animal this small survive? In ecological terms, an animal this small should be erased from the record, unless it has a strategy we haven't been measuring. The answer lies in bone chemistry, skull anatomy, and metabolic rates. And what the research team discovered is challenging fundamental assumptions about ornithopod evolution, survival strategies, and the pressures that can favor behavioral flexibility. Over the next 18 minutes, you're going to see how this chicken-sized dinosaur is reshaping what we know about adaptation, survival, and the evolutionary experiments that work. Let's begin. Northern Spain, Burgos province. A region of rolling hills, ancient riverbeds, and red clay floodplains that date back 125 million years to the Early Cretaceous. The site is called Vegageet. It sits within the Castrillo de la Reina Formation, a layer of sedimentary rock that preserves an ancient ecosystem: rivers, forests, wetlands, and the animals that lived there. For decades, paleontologists have been excavating fossils here. Mostly large dinosaurs, sauropods with 40-foot necks, theropods with recurved teeth, armored ankylosaurs. But in 1998, fieldworkers noticed something unusual: a cluster of tiny bones embedded in red mudstone, delicate, fragile, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Here's the 3-beat escalation that changed everything. Beat 1: tiny bones found. At first glance, the fragments looked like debris. Broken ribs, vertebrae, limb fragments too small to belong to the massive herbivores typically found at the site. Beat 2: everyone assumes juveniles. The team's initial assumption was standard protocol. These were juvenile remains, baby dinosaurs that died before reaching maturity, common in fossil sites where young animals succumb to predation, disease, or flooding. Beat 3: histology proves adult and reveals a metabolic surprise. Dr. Koen Stein from Vrije Universiteit Brussels led the histology study. His team sliced the femur into sections just 100 microns thick, thinner than a human hair, and examined them under polarized light microscopy. Under that light, the growth lines appeared like faint rings in glass, revealing a story written in bone. The tissue was dense, highly vascularized, with tightly packed growth lines indicating the animal had reached skeletal maturity. There were no zones of cartilage, no evidence of ongoing growth. This was an adult. But here's the surprise. The bone microstructure revealed something extraordinary about metabolism. Quote from Dr. Koen Stein: "Bone microstructure tells us that at least one individual was an adult, with a metabolic regime approaching that of small mammals or birds." That single phrase, approaching that of small mammals or birds, is the key. Most dinosaurs are often described as having metabolic strategies between classic reptiles and modern birds mammals. But Foskeia's bone microstructure points to unusually high sustained activity for its size, an energetic regime approaching that of small mammals or birds. Over the next 2 decades, the team recovered fossils from at least 5 individuals: skull fragments, vertebrae, limb bones, teeth, portions of the pelvis. In February 2026, an international team led by Dr. Paul-Émile Dieudonné from the National University of Rio Negro in Argentina published their findings in the journal Papers in Paleontology. The species name honors its location and ecology. Foskeia comes from the Greek words fuzz, light, and bosking, foraging, referencing its lightweight body and feeding strategy. Pelendonum honors the Pelendones, a Celtiberian tribe that once inhabited the region. But what exactly is this animal? Foskeia is an ornithopod, a member of the group that includes famous herbivores like iguanodon and Parasaurolophus. Specifically, it belongs to Rhabdodontomorpha, plant-eating dinosaurs that lived primarily in Europe during the Cretaceous. Most Rhabdodontomorphs were medium-sized, 6 to 15 feet long, weighing hundreds of pounds. Foskeia, just 50 centimeters long, 20 inches, about the length of a standard ruler. It weighed an estimated 2 to 3 pounds. And yet it wasn't just small, it was anatomically strange. Quote from Dr. Marcos Becerra, Universidad Nacional de Córdoba: "Miniaturization did not imply evolutionary simplicity. This skull is weird and hyper-derived." Because when paleontologists reconstructed the ecosystem Foskeia inhabited, the predators, the competitors, the environmental pressures, they realized something unsettling. This animal had no obvious survival advantages: no armor, no speed, no venom. In ecological terms, an animal this small should be erased from the fossil record, unless it has a strategy we haven't been measuring. The answer is in its skull, and what that skull reveals is going to change how you think about survival itself. Let's reconstruct the world Foskeia pelendonum lived in. 125 million years ago, during the Early Cretaceous, the Iberian Peninsula wasn't connected to mainland Europe. Tectonic forces had created an archipelago, a chain of islands separated by shallow seas. Islands are evolutionary pressure cookers: limited space, limited resources, predators and prey forced into close contact with no escape routes. And the fossil record from Burgos province shows exactly what Foskeia was competing against. Large theropods like Concavenator existed in early Cretaceous Spain, a 20-foot-long predator with a bizarre hump on its back and 4-inch recurved teeth designed for slicing flesh. Smaller dromaeosaurids, raptor family predators 6 to 8 feet long, with sickle-shaped claws designed for pinning prey. Crocodilians, both terrestrial and semi-aquatic species, some exceeding 12 feet in length. Sauropods, long-necked herbivores measuring 30 to 40 feet, weighing several tons, browsing the same low vegetation Foskeia fed on. Other ornithopods, medium-sized bipedal herbivores with similar diets. Now picture Foskeia in this environment. 20 inches long, 2 pounds, standing on the ground in forest edge clearings and floodplain corridor habitats. Here's the death maths. A concavenator could swallow it whole without chewing. A dromaeosaurid could pin it with 1 foot. Even a juvenile crocodilian could kill it in seconds. So how did it survive? Most small dinosaurs use one of 3 strategies. Strategy 1: speed. Small ornithopods like Hypsilophodon could sprint at 30 miles per hour, outrunning most predators. But Foskeia's limb proportions don't suggest high-speed running. Its legs were relatively short, its body proportions more suited for agility in dense vegetation than open-ground sprinting. Strategy 2: hiding. Tree-dwelling species like Microraptor climb to escape predators. But Foskeia's claws were blunt, its limbs proportioned for ground locomotion, not arboreal climbing. Strategy 3: armor. Ankylosaurs had bony plates and tail clubs. Foskeia had none. So what's left? When the research team analyzed Foskeia's skull using CT scanning and comparative anatomy, they found something unexpected. The skull was disproportionately large for the body, about 15% of total length. The eye sockets were enormous, suggesting large eyes and advanced vision. The brain case was unusually spacious. And the teeth small, leaf-shaped with complex where may point to specialized feeding on certain plants. The skull isn't just small, it's rearranged. Quote from Dr. Penelope Cruzado Caballero, Universidad de la Laguna. Its anatomy is weird in precisely the kind of way that rewrites evolutionary trees. But here's what really caught the team's attention. The bone histology, the microscopic structure of the bone tissue, revealed something extraordinary about Foskeia's physiology. Dr. Cohn-Stein, bone microstructure tells us that at least one individual was an adult with a metabolic regime approaching that of small mammals or birds. That's critical. Most dinosaurs had metabolic rates intermediate between modern reptiles and mammals, faster than lizards, slower than mice. But Foskeia's bone structure suggested a metabolism closer to modern birds and small mammals, meaning it had a high energy demand, rapid tissue turnover, and a physiology consistent with higher sustained activity. Why does that matter? Because high metabolism enables complex behavior, not proof of intelligence, but evidence of the kind of physiology that makes behavioral flexibility, spatial navigation, and learning possible. In other words, Foskeia may have survived not through physical advantages, but through a strategy we haven't been measuring. And here's the implication that's reshaping paleontological thinking. If Foskeia survived through behavioral flexibility, by learning predator patterns, remembering safe routes, recognizing threats, then we need to rethink the pressures that favor complex behavior in evolution. Because the standard story says those traits evolved in predators, in hunters that needed to outsmart prey. But Foskeia suggests the opposite. The pressures that can favor behavioral flexibility may have evolved first in the hunted, in the small, in the vulnerable. And 60 million years later, another group of small, vulnerable animals would use a similar strategy to inherit the Earth. Mammals. Now let's talk about why Foskeia matters beyond its size and survival strategy. Because this tiny dinosaur is solving one of the biggest puzzles in ornithopod evolution, often described as a 70 million year gap in the fossil record. Here's the problem. Ornithopods, the group Foskeia belongs to, first appeared in the Middle Jurassic, about 170 million years ago. Early species like Heterodontosaurus were small, about 3 feet long, with simple teeth and basic body plans. By the late Cretaceous, 100 million years ago, ornithopods had diversified into massive forms. Iguanodon at 30 feet, hadrosaurs like Parasaurolophus at 40 feet, some weighing over 4 tons. But here's the riddle: we have the tiny early forms and we have the giants, but we've been missing the stepping stones. Between 150 and 80 million years ago, there's a huge gap in the fossil record. We have very few intermediate species showing how small ornithopods evolved into giants. Paleontologists call this the ornithopod gap, and it's frustrated researchers for decades. Quote from Dr. Thierry Tortosa, St. Victoire Natural Reserve. Foskeia helps fill a 70 million year gap, a small key that unlocks a vast missing chapter. Here's what the phylogenetic analysis revealed. When the research team compared Foskeia's anatomy to over 200 other ornithischian species, measuring skull proportions, tooth shapes, limb ratios, hip structures, they discovered something surprising. Foskeia is most closely related to Metabolism, a 24-foot ornithopod from Australia that lived 100 million years ago. But Foskeia is much older, 125 million years, and much smaller. This suggests that the rhabdodontomorph lineage, which would eventually produce large European herbivores, started small and diversified rapidly during the early Cretaceous. And here's where it gets really interesting. The phylogenetic analysis also revived an old hypothesis called Phytodinosauria, the idea that all major plant-eating dinosaur groups, ornithopods, ceratopsians, armored dinosaurs, share a common ancestor. This hypothesis was proposed decades ago, but fell out of favor because the fossil evidence was incomplete. Foskeia changes that. Quote from Dr. Paul-Émile Dieudonné, "In our results, the plant-eating dinosaurs form a natural group called Phytodinosauria. This hypothesis should be further tested with more data." The analysis revives Phytodinosauria not as a certainty, but as a testable possibility, one that changes which fossils we treat as ancestors and which ones we've misfiled as side branches. Why does this matter? Because if Phytodinosauria is real, it means herbivory, eating plants, evolved once in dinosaurs and then diversified into dozens of different body plans. Horned dinosaurs, armored dinosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, long-necked sauropods, all descended from a common plant-eating ancestor. And Foskeia, with its weird skull, specialized teeth, and miniaturized body, represents an early experiment in that diversification. Quote from Dr. Tabata Zainsko Ferreira, Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro. This is not a mini iguanodon, it is something fundamentally different. But there's one more anatomical feature that's baffling paleontologists, and it has to do with how Foskeia moved. The research team found evidence of shifting posture during growth. Young Foskeia were fully bipedal, walking on two legs, with their bodies balanced over the hips and their tails extended for counterbalance. But as they matured, the limb proportions changed. The forelimbs lengthened slightly, the hindlimbs became more robust, the body center of gravity shifted forward. This suggests that adult Foskeia may have spent more time in a semi-quadrupedal stance, using their hands to grasp vegetation, stabilize on slopes, or navigate dense undergrowth. Quote from Dr. Diudine, despite its small size, Foskeia shows specialized dentition and evidence of shifting posture during growth, relying on bursts of speed in dense forests. So here's the picture emerging. Foskeia wasn't a generalist herbivore competing directly with larger dinosaurs. It was a specialist, feeding on specific plants in specific microhabitats, using agility and possibly learned behavior to avoid predators, and shifting its locomotion strategy as it matured. And that specialization allowed it to survive in an ecosystem dominated by animals hundreds of times its size. It changes which fossils we treat as ancestors, and which ones we've misfiled as side branches. But here's the part that connects everything. Foskeia didn't just survive by being small and specialized. It survived by exploiting a niche that larger dinosaurs couldn't access: dense vegetation, seasonal food sources, microhabitats too confined for giants. And 60 million years later, after the dinosaurs went extinct, another group of small, specialized animals would use a similar strategy. Mammals, and eventually us. Let's connect the evolutionary dots. Foskeia pelendonum lived 125 million years ago. By 100 million years ago, it had vanished from the fossil record, possibly due to sea level changes, new predators, or climate shifts. But its survival strategy didn't disappear. Because 60 million years later, after the asteroid struck and the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, a new group of small, vulnerable animals inherited the Earth using a similar playbook. Mammals. Mammals first appeared 200 million years ago during the Triassic. For 135 million years, longer than the entire history of primates, they stayed small. Shrew-sized, nocturnal, insectivorous. Why? Because they couldn't compete with dinosaurs. Dinosaurs dominated daytime ecosystems, occupying the primary niches for herbivory, predation, and omnivory with bodies optimized for those roles. So mammals did what Foskeia did. They stayed small. They occupied marginal niches, nighttime underground burrows, dense vegetation. They invested in high metabolism, relatively large brains for their body size and behavioral flexibility. They survived in the margins. And when the Chicxulub asteroid struck 66 million years ago, many giants vanished. Yet small lineages with flexibility repeatedly outlasted ecosystem shocks. The survivors, the ones with high metabolic rates, flexible diets, learned behaviors, and the ability to exploit marginal environments. Within 10 million years, mammals radiated into every ecological niche on Earth. Whales in the oceans, bats in the air, primates in the trees, elephants and predators on land. And 66 million years after the extinction, one lineage of primates developed language, tools, culture, and technology. Here's the evolutionary parallel that matters. Small body size plus marginal niches plus flexibility equals resilience when ecosystems shift. Foskeia proved that 125 million years ago. Mammals proved it 66 million years ago. And we're proving it right now, in a world facing rapid environmental change, climate shifts, habitat loss, technological disruption. The survivors aren't always the biggest or the most established. They're the ones that can learn fastest, adapt quickest, and see opportunities where others see obstacles. So here's the profound lesson of Foskeia pelendonum. Evolution doesn't favor size or strength alone, it favors adaptability. The species that survive aren't always the most powerful. They're the ones that can learn, adapt, and change. Foskeia proved that 125 million years ago in the mountains of what is now Spain. And every fossil we uncover, every species we analyze, every adaptation we decode, it's another message from deep time telling us that life finds a way. Not through dominance, through adaptability. Not through strength alone, through flexibility. Not through size, through specialization and resilience. But there's one more piece to this story, and it has to do with what we still don't know about Foskeia and what future discoveries might reveal. Because if we find a nest, we solve three mysteries at once: reproduction, social behavior, and growth. Let's talk about the gaps in our knowledge, because that's where the next breakthroughs will come from. If we find a nest, we solve three mysteries at once. Mystery 1: reproduction. We don't yet know how Foskeia reproduced. Did it lay eggs? If so, how many? How large were the hatchlings? Did parents provide care? The pelvic bones show some unusual features, broader than expected, with modified attachment sites for muscles, but we need more specimens to understand what that means. If future excavations uncover nests or eggs, we'll learn how Foskeia balanced the trade-off between small body size and reproductive success. Did it lay many small eggs? A few large ones? Did hatchlings grow rapidly, or did they remain small for extended periods like modern ground-nesting birds? Mystery 2: social behavior. The fossil site contained at least 5 individuals. Were they a family group, a breeding colony, seasonal aggregation? We don't know yet, but if Foskeia lived socially, cooperating to spot predators, sharing food sources, coordinating movements, that would explain the relatively large brain case and high metabolic rate. Social coordination is metabolically expensive, but in hyperdation environments, it can be the difference between survival and extinction. Mystery 3: growth rates and lifespan. Bone histology suggests Foskeia reached skeletal maturity in 2 to 3 years, but how long did they live after that? We don't yet know the exact lifespan. Additional histology across individuals could constrain maximum age. Even a modest lifespan combined with early metabolic maturity could allow for the accumulation of learned behavior across multiple seasons. Knowledge passed from parents to offspring, memory-based survival strategies. That would make Foskeia not just behaviorally flexible, but experienced. Beyond reproduction, there are other mysteries. Mystery 4: vocalization. Modern ground-dwelling birds use complex vocalizations. Alarm calls, territorial songs, mate attraction. Did Foskeia vocalize? If so, what structures enabled it? Future CT scans of inner ear anatomy, hyoid bones, throat structures, and respiratory systems might reveal vocal capabilities. Mystery 5: why did it go extinct? Foskeia disappears from the fossil record by 100 million years ago. What happened? Possible explanations: climate change, sea levels rose, flooding lowland habitats. New competitors, early hadrosaurs and advanced ornithopods diversified during this period, possibly outcompeting smaller specialists. New predators, dromaeosaurids, raptors, underwent rapid diversification in the mid-Cretaceous, becoming more efficient small prey hunters. Understanding extinction pressures would tell us the limits of this survival strategy, when being small and specialized isn't enough. And here's why these mysteries matter. Every time we uncover a new fossil, a new species, a new adaptation, we're not just learning about the past. We're learning the rules of survival itself. We're seeing which strategies work, which fail, and under what conditions. And in a world facing rapid change, environmental, technological, social, those lessons are more relevant than ever. Because the species that survive the next 100 years won't necessarily be the biggest, the strongest, or the most numerous. They'll be the ones that can adapt, learn, change. Just like Foskeia. And that brings us to the final question. What does a chicken-sized dinosaur from 125 million years ago teach us about our own future? Let's come full circle. A tiny dinosaur, northern Spain, 125 million years ago. Living in a world of giants, no armor, no speed, no obvious defenses. And yet it survived for millions of years. Well, not through size, not through strength, but through specialization, behavioral flexibility, and adaptability. Foskeia pelendonum carved out a niche where being small was an advantage, where agility, possibly learned behavior, and metabolic efficiency mattered more than brute force. Quote from Dr. Paul-Émile Dieudonné: "These fossils prove that evolution experimented just as radically at small body sizes as at large ones. The future of dinosaur research will depend on paying attention to the humble, the fragmentary, the small." And that's the lesson that echoes across 125 million years. Evolution doesn't follow a script, it explores possibilities. When one strategy dominates, being large, being fast, being powerful, evolution doesn't compete head-on. it finds another way. Foskeia found survival in smallness, specialization, and possibly behavioral flexibility. Mammals 60 million years later found survival in adaptability, high metabolism, and learned behavior. And humans 66 million years after that found survival in cooperation, language, and technology. Three different lineages, three different time periods, the same fundamental strategy. When you can't dominate through physical superiority, you adapt, you learn, you innovate. And here's why that matters today. We're living in a time of unprecedented change. Climate shifts, technological disruption, social transformation. The organizations, communities, and individuals that thrive in the next 50 years won't necessarily be the biggest or the most established. They'll be the ones that can learn fastest, adapt quickest, see opportunities where others see obstacles. They'll be the ones who understand that survival isn't about resisting change, it's about embracing it. Foskeia pelendonum proved that 125 million years ago, in the mountains of what is now Spain. And every fossil we uncover, every species we analyze, every adaptation we decode, it's another message from deep time telling us that life finds a way. So the next time you visit a museum and stand before the skeleton of a giant dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus, a Brachiosaurus, a Triceratops, remember this. Many giants vanished, yet small lineages with flexibility repeatedly outlasted ecosystem shocks. In 125 million years from now, when some future intelligence looks back at our fossils, they'll ask the same question we're asking about Foskeia. How did they survive in a world that seemed designed to destroy them? And the answer will be the same. They adapted, they learned, they changed. If you made it this far, you're in the top 3% of viewers. Subscribe for more deep dives into evolutionary history, because the past has more to teach us than we ever imagined. The story of Foskeia pelendonum isn't just about a tiny dinosaur. It's a reminder that evolution doesn't only build bigger bodies, sometimes it builds better strategies. And that's a story that never gets old.